Okay, you know what, Bryce? You absolutely are the worst host I've ever had.
Well, you know what? You're the one who welcomed me onto the show.
Yeah, well,
get better at selecting your hosts. If you don't want anybody, Pastor Mike leaves, pick someone else.
You know what? You were the bottom of the barrel.
I am the bottom of the barrel, but praise God, he still uses me.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Forgiven podcast. Sorry you had to see that between two friends.
We'll deal with it later.
We'll deal with it later. Thank you so much for joining. If you couldn't tell, that was a bit. We planned that. I thought it was really funny. So if you haven't seen the title of this video or episode of the podcast yet, we're going to be talking about arguing. We're going to be talking about discussing different topics, discussing like how do you argue, or is it even okay to have a different opinion than somebody? Can you challenge one person's beliefs? Can you challenge somebody in an argument? How do you do that? What's the Christian view on it? What does the Bible say? We're really going to ask the question of how do we argue well? Is it okay to argue? So, obviously, yes, it is okay and actually a good thing to argue and to challenge each other on what they believe. Right? So, obviously, I don't think Bryce is the bottom of the barrel or anything.
You don't?
No.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Wow, thank you so much.
And
you
he
know what?
really,
I forgive you.
yeah. And so, that's what we're going to be talking about. It's the idea that it's actually a good thing for us to challenge each other and to argue. But how do we do that well? How do we do that successfully? How do you do that without hurting each other's feelings? Because let's be for real. If you and I actually got into a discussion and an argument like that, we would probably actually hurt each other's feelings.
Yeah, you told me I was the bottom of the barrel, man. That was a shot.
Well, last week you got to punch me in the face, though.
Oh, that's right.
So
it evens out.
You know, it evens out.
People listening are gonna be like, "What is this?"
Yeah,
this
you gotta go
podcast?"
listen to last week's episode because actually, and this is a plug for last week's episode on what happened to forgiveness. You'd be surprised how much these two episodes will coexist, how they'll go together.
Yeah.
So
They complement each other very well.
If you haven't listened to last week's episode, please go and do that because you'll learn a lot about. Actually, you'll learn how we ended up kind of at this topic anyway. Truthfully, we should have done this topic first, then, then forgiveness.
2020 hindsight.
But I'll be honest, the reason we did forgiveness last week was because that's what I preached on Sunday. So it was a really good ground for me to test out some sermon material. So
There we go.
Anyway, that's enough of an introduction. I'm Pastor Logan. If you guys didn't know, this is one of my amazing co-hosts, Pastor Bryce.
Hey.
And as you can see, we're still missing somebody. Pastor Mike is still on vacation. And he deserves it. Him and Angela, his wife, they work very hard. They absolutely deserve their vacation. So we wish him the best. And I guess when the boss is gone, we get to have fun and joke around and all that stuff.
When the boss is gone, the kids get to play.
Yeah, I didn't want to say we were his kids because that's a little weird, but I'm glad we were both thinking it. So yeah, let's talk about arguing. As you just took a huge sip of coffee, really bad podcasting host over here. Let's just define what argue actually means. Because I think a lot of people, we throw this word around, but we don't understand it. And I think the best way to have a discussion on something is to be on the same playing field. So this definition that I'm going to say is an amalgamation. I kind of took four different definitions and put them all together. So I have the Merriam-Webster, Cambridge, and just like the generic Google and dictionary.com one. So argument and argue, when you argue with somebody, it means to give reason or cite evidence in support of your idea, your action, or a theory on something. Typically, it's with the aim of persuading the other person to share your view on such action, topic, or theory. Basically, you have to present reason for your argument or against the other person's argument. It is to contend or disagree in words. And this is where we're not going to touch on this too much, but an argument isn't based on feelings. Or at least it shouldn't be. That's not a healthy argument. A healthy argument can use feelings, but it can't be based in your feelings because then your emotions are going to rise and you're going to let them get the better of you as opposed to actually talking about the issue at hand. And there's this saying, facts don't care about your feelings, and yes, that is true. But when you argue with somebody, specifically your significant other, let's say, you do have to take into account the other person's feelings. You just can't let that control the conversation.
Yeah.
And then look, I'm just going to go through all the definitions. Then we have debate. Because again, debate and argue, they're often thrown around together.
Yeah.
Debate is a formal discussion on a particular topic, most likely in a public meeting or setting or legislative assembly. It's in which opposing arguments are put forward. So you would have your opening statement, then you would have your rebuttal is what it's called. And that's, Team A gets to stake their point, Team B gets to rebuttal it. And then Team A gets to defend. Done.
Yeah.
So that's that. And then we have discussion. Discussion is the action or process of talking about something in order to reach a decision or an exchange of ideas. So all of these work together. Oftentimes you start with a discussion.
Then it becomes a heated discussion.
Then maybe it becomes an argument. And then sometimes you have a debate, which then slowly turns into an argument, right? I mean, we're Canadian if you haven't put it together, but we don't do debates in Canada really. Like we don't do like prime minister debates.
Yeah, we do,
but not.
Listen, it's not as aggressive. There's not as many shots fired.
We don't really do debates. Okay,
well, we don't do 2 years of it.
Yeah, we don't really do how our friends in the South do it. If you're an American, or you've ever seen, I'm sure most of you have seen an American debate because Canadian news never actually covers anything that's going on in Canada. You can see that their debates often turn into arguments. It just turns into a slamming match of who can outwit the other person.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and so it starts off with a discussion, then they move it to a formal debate, but then it turns into an argument.
Yep. The poor mediator that has to try and direct it. Like I think that's my favorite part to watch. I remember the last American election. This is a little off topic, but
no, go for it.
I remember watching it. And I thought it was the funniest thing. The poor guy standing there in between Biden and Trump is like, guys, we need to get back on pace. And then they just kept on arguing. He's just like, the camera keeps going to him. And he's like, I just don't know what to do. Like he's done everything that he can try. And then the next debate was a little bit better because I think the parents talked to their kids to make sure they behave in the next debate.
Their advisors came to them.
Hey, you both look really silly.
And that's what we're talking about. So, Bryce, you're married.
I am.
I'm single, have always been single. So I don't actually know what it's like to be in a relationship with somebody where you have to share in your goals. You guys have to discuss what you want from each other and everything. And so how do you and your wife argue? How do you guys and you don't have to get into specifics or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious because we've talked about this off air and everything like that. So I just how do you guys handle it? Because I know every couple might have something a little bit different that they do.
I think we've learned to argue well and disagree well. Someone once told me that submission only happens when you disagree. And I think that one I really took that to heart in our marriage. I was like, oh, okay. Because it's you can't really submit. We're called to submit to our husbands and our wives. And that can only happen when you're in disagreement. And so that's one part that's helped me with it. But then how we argue is we have learned that neither of us are, both of us need time to actually process sometimes. And so if we try and push that person to come to a conclusion or try and force them to come to the conclusion I want, it never ends well. It ends up with one of us being upset, being shut down, mad, frustrated. And so what we've learned to do when we disagree or have an argument is actually to take time. One of us will be like, hey, thank you for saying that, and thank you for sharing that. I need time to process it. Sorry, I'm really phlegmy this morning. And so we will actually separate for a period of time and then come back and then assess what the other person said. And if there was, it's never actually 100% saying that person was wrong. And so it was like, if I went in and Ashley's like, you are lazy, you don't put your clothes away. And I'm going to be like, right away, I'm going to become on the defensive. I'm going to be like, well, you know what? I'm tired. We just have a child, blah, 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 fill in the blank. And I become defensive. But really, I know inside that she's right. Like, I'm like, she actually has some truth to that, but I don't want to admit it. Nobody wants to admit when they're wrong, when they're called out. And so what happens is then I say like, hey, Ashley, I just thank you for sharing that. I can't have this conversation right now. I need time to process it. So I will leave and I'll come back and I will actually, once that my pride has been put aside, I will say, hey, you know what? You are right to a degree in that. I have been a little bit lazy and I haven't been putting away my clothes that I should. I will do better going forward. So it actually makes me a better person from healthy conflict resolution.
Absolutely.
And then we have the problem. I don't want to agree with it. It comes down to how I'm going to take it or how she's going to take it. There's been times I'm using me as an example because it's mine, but it's been the reverse roles too, where I've called her out on stuff and then she doesn't like it right away. She becomes defensive, but then we come back later. I mean, because there's tension. You always know when there's tension. You can just feel it. You can even tell when you're around someone else. You're like, okay, something's up. And then when we come back together, the tension isn't as high. We discuss it, and there's usually a resolution. We come to some type of compromise, or we realize, hey, that was just actually silly. I'm just really tired, and I reacted poorly and easy. So that's kind of how me and my wife have done it. We don't do it perfect.
No, and
we're still learning, and I'm sure I'm going to learn. If you ask me 5 years from now, I might have new techniques of how we deal with conflict resolution.
And I think the reason you said something there, you said a couple of things that really stood out to me. First of all, you mentioned pride. You said that nobody want you don't want to lose your pride, or you don't want to appear that you've been wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a huge factor in almost all the arguments that people have is we don't like being told no, we don't like being told we're wrong, or we have too much pride to think that we could ever be wrong. And to a degree, we should have pride. We should when you discuss something and everything like that, you absolutely should look at that and look at it with some pride and everything like that. But you can't let that control you.
Yeah.
And the most important thing that you said there, which is a perfect transition, is you said that your arguments always end with resolution.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're trying to disseminate to today, is that to argue, it's okay to argue if there's a resolution. But if you're just yelling and screaming at each other or arguing or whatever
well, it goes nowhere.
That doesn't go exactly.
Nobody is becoming a better person from you guys arguing that way.
Yes.
Like if I insulted my wife every time we argued, neither of us are coming out of that stronger people.
Exactly.
I am looking like a fool and she is just getting hurt.
Yeah.
And so helpful, if it leads to resolution, both people should become better people after that disagreement, after that argument, where it's like, hey, I'm thinking about it, you're thinking about it. I now am becoming a better person, right? There's a passage where iron sharpens iron.
Yep.
There's a reason why we use that passage, because we're going to argue, we're going to disagree, but it's going to make us better.
Yeah, and the thing is that iron sharpens iron thing is it doesn't happen without adversity.
Yep.
The only reason iron literally becomes sharper is you take something that is hard and gritty and you're shaving off the bits that it doesn't like. You were making it better through adversity, through taking the imperfections and things away through grinding and hard work. And that's, I think we often just kind of neglect that. Yeah. Some people just don't understand basic metalworking and things like that too.
Yeah.
So that's what a good healthy argument actually leads to resolution. And if you're arguing just to put the person down, you're not arguing, you're just being a bully.
That's actually a good way to put it. Yeah.
Like if you
You're just
don't,
being a jerk.
yeah, if you don't have intention to either, come to a compromise with your point or be willing to help the other person come to a compromise, then you need to stop because you're just being a bully.
Yeah. There are definitely I have met Christians out there that like to just stir the pot.
Absolutely.
Just stir the pot. And don't get me wrong, sometimes you need to stir the pot to 100%. Make people think. But when I'm saying this, I mean there's people that I know that intentionally want to make people mad.
Yes.
They want to make you pissed off. And they have no intentions of resolving that afterwards.
Yep.
They're just going to poke the bear, make you scream, and then just be like, look, you're an angry person. Yep. And then leave it at that. Absolutely.
So, and maybe this is a little off topic, but I'm going to share it anyway. I have been going through Suits on Netflix.
You're a heathen.
Y'all can judge me in the comments later. I don't.
You're a heathen.
I'm a human being. I like watching TV. Get over it. And one of the things they talk about, it comes up a lot in the show, is like there are these like big fancy lawyers, but oftentimes, and it's completely fabricated. It's not how real law works at all. But it's still like a good dramatic show. Mm. But one of the things that happens is they'll be in what's called like a deposition, where it's like you put the camera in front of somebody and they can't lie because they're under oath. So it's on camera so that they know you're lying, whatever. Mm. And a lot of the times what happens is it's not the person on camera that is like, it's the lawyers going at each other all the time. And it's oftentimes the lawyer who's doing the deposing is what it's called. So when you're the one asking the questions.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily 9 times out of 10, it just turns into them just like screaming obscenities at the other lawyer and everything like that. And it becomes this like, they're just trying to stir the pot to get a reaction out of them.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's to press more charges or to just like use that in court to show like this person is unhinged or whatever. It's just like, we see that even in like the real world. And I know I just gave a fake example, but I'm sure that stuff happens in the real world. I mean, look at like in sports.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah. That's a great example, actually.
Like, I played football for many years, and I'm not a trash talker. I'm really not. Like, I don't... Like, there's a time and a place to get in a... Like, I was a lineman, so I'm nose to nose with people pretty much all the time.
Yeah.
So people are hurling insults and everything like that. 9 times out of 10, I wouldn't say anything back. Or, like, sometimes if the other person was, like, really cool... Like, because you can tell, right? Like, when somebody's actually just being a jerk and throwing insults at you to try to get in your head.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, okay, I just block you out and I'm going to hit you harder. But sometimes you get lined up with the other guy who's, like, actually just, like, a really nice, like, cool, competitive guy, you know? And he's kind of, like, he's trying to get in your head in playful ways. He's like, oh, don't step over the line. Don't get offside, And he's just, like, being playful because there's that mutual respect.
Yeah.
Man, sometimes, like, you could just get some really, really good... like quips in and everything like that. But there are those people that just intentionally stir the pot to try to jump you offside or to try to get in your head or to like do whatever. And it
I did that all the time. I was a DB. Oh, you're
chirping the
I was going the wide out.
I
was going to the slot and I'm like, hey, I'll give you more distance. I'll give you more distance. I won't pop. I'll pop you, man. Like I'm not even gonna play you at the line. I don't even need it. And I would just chirp them. And some receivers but then there was one guy and he's actually now in the CFL. He was his name is Richie Sindani. I grew up playing football with him. He was a prime time smack talker, and he was really good at getting in your head. And I would talk a little bit smack. Some people would piss me off, and I would I would talk smack more back just to get in their head. And then Richie, man, that guy was it doesn't surprise me he's playing professional football right now.
Yeah, that's
because he knew how to get into your head.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he was so good at it. He would find something, he would read your face, and then pounce on it.
Yeah, so I played against a guy like that. I don't know if he's playing in the CFL or not. I don't even remember his name. He was the top pick. This dude was an insane D lineman, just absolutely massive for being 17. And he just knew how to get in my head, but not in I'm sure this whatever maybe he was actually throwing real insults at you.
Oh, he was a great guy. I knew him off the field. He was a great guy.
Okay, so he wasn't
it was just his mental he just did on the field.
Yeah. So right, but this guy, he wasn't actually just trying to get in your head. He was just actually a jerk. He's calling out people's moms and he was I'm going to desecrate. He literally said, "I will desecrate your parents' grave." And I was like, whoa. I was
Wow.
like, that takes stirring the pot to a whole other level. And I got mad. Like I said, I have a very high patience.
How did you deal with that argument?
Oh, I leveled the guy the next play. I went out of, like, he had switched. He was playing linebacker. I screwed the play, but I laid the guy out. Like, I mean, like, I literally threw I threw the nose off of me and
Wow.
went and just hit him. Like,
That's
out,
awesome.
it was a running play. I should have run. I didn't. I totally screwed the play, but I laid the guy out. I got back on the bench and coach
Gave you one look. And
Oh, he was yelling at me.
Yeah.
He was like yelling at me. He's like, "What the heck? You messed the play." And then he like looks at me, and then he gives me the thumbs up or whatever, because he has to reprimand me in front of the team, but he knew what was going on. But if people do that in the church, right?
If I go up to someone and just absolutely pop them one in.
Well, you'll definitely get charged with assault. That's for sure.
Exactly.
But I want to look at examples of this with Jesus, because Jesus was constantly put
Yes.
in these positions all the time. Right? Like almost every interaction he has with the Pharisees is to try to trap him, to try to goad him into doing an action that would be unbecoming of him, to get him to argue, to get him to make a scene so they could arrest him or that they could do this. And Jesus, it's not that Jesus was a doormat. He didn't just roll over and take what was coming to him. He did fight back and he did argue back, but it was this like really respectful and like sort of like emotionally driven but fact-based conversation.
Well, I was going to say, with the notes that you put on here, like, which, hey, for those of you guys that are listening, like, that don't know this, like, Logan puts notes out for each and every single episode, and he does a phenomenal job. Like, he details them, he gets the scripture, he backs up them, he gets the main points. He does a really great job. And so, anyways, I wanted to, for the people that didn't know that,
my head just went like 10 sizes.
I saw that, that your hat's not fitting you anymore. But yeah, he describes like how Jesus actually argues. In Luke 10, like people come up to him and he challenges them not by arguing or then like be like throwing like stuff back at him, because like you said, they're trying to trap Jesus.
Yes.
But Jesus is so patient. He's not prideful. He's not. He hears these insults, and most of us would respond in how I would respond.
Absolutely.
Is by like, well, and get immediately defensive. But instead, Jesus immediately goes on the offense.
Yeah,
He doesn't become defensive because he knows who he is. He's so solid in like understanding, and he challenges it with a question. And I remember reading this morning, like even just in prep for this, I was like, man, like I need to get better at that. Well, I need to get better at like asking questions. Like instead of like being like in response to like defending me, I would like ask me like that person, well, why do you think that?
Yeah, exactly.
Or respond with a question with a question.
Yes.
I know people hate that, but also it diffuses so many situations.
It also puts the onus on them to come up with a response. And so Jesus is amazing at it. Like he is the best model that we can look at.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I have always done is I'm a media guy, right? So I do sound, right? I'm staring in front of a computer and a soundboard. Like I do this stuff for a living, and I have pretty much ever since I've been in the church.
Yeah.
And all of the people out there that have volunteered in production media, and production ministry, y'all know everybody has an opinion. Like, sound was too loud, sound was too quiet, the lights were too bright, or, oh no, there's some smoke on the stage.
The lights weren't bright enough.
Yeah, I couldn't hear the pastor, and you have his gain maxed, and he's ringing through the room, and so it's like, and people were constantly coming back to the sound booth at my last church. Like we had just installed a new sound system, so we're still working out all the kinks, right? We're still setting levels. We're still it was a huge upgrade, and so we're still learning.
Yeah,
and people were constantly coming back and just belittling my team. I'm a bear. Like my nickname is Logie Bear. Like if you get in the way of my team members, like if you get in the way of my family, I attack. So these and it was just these people were coming back and were just complaining and arguing with me and saying it did this or it did that or it should be this, it should be that. So you know what I started doing? I took a page out of Jesus's book, the Bible, not literally, of course. Don't rip up your Bibles. And I would just start asking them questions. So instead of me getting defensive, I would say, well, it's like, well, and maybe I was a little backhanded. And not maybe, I was. So what I would do is I would ask them, I'd be like, well, if you know so much, why don't you come and show me how you would do it?
Yeah.
Which is a little sarcastic.
I would say passive.
It's very passive aggressive. Absolutely. But Jesus is passive aggressive. Like, I don't like, and not in a bad way. Passive aggressive has this like negative connotation to it. But like, these people come up and be like, I couldn't hear this, I couldn't hear that. And then I would be like, well, I'm sorry. Like, I acknowledge what they felt. And then I show them the facts and I say, well, like, look, I was like, well, here is this, this, and this. And I would show them, and then I would turn it up and I would turn other things down. And I would show them like, look, like, I can't actually like change this because of this, that, and the other. And then when that wasn't good enough for them, then I would go with, well, what would you do?
Yeah.
Because I don't have an answer, but I can definitely ask them a question. I can diffuse the situation by going on the offensive and saying, like, what would you do? Like, if you're such an expert, if you have this opinion coming to me, it's your job to defend it.
Yeah.
And now I'm giving you your chance.
Yeah.
And that's what Jesus did. Right? And specifically in the Luke 10 instance, this scribe is asking him about eternal life.
Yep.
And Jesus asks him 2 questions about the law, because this guy was an expert in the law. And he completely flips the situation on his head and makes the guy go and find the answer for himself. Yeah. Which is hugely, hugely important. And so, like, as Bryce and we're pastors, okay? So we get put in situations like Jesus all the time. Like, truthfully, we do.
Yeah.
And we get challenged, we get pushed, we get people try to trap us.
Yeah, literally. They will literally like try and like they'll find a way to get you in a corner where they know you can't like leave. There's no exits and there's nobody around, and they'll like literally like trap you in a corner and approach you like with a question that like is intentional, that they want their answer, and if you give them something different, you can't go anywhere until you give them your answer. I say that because it actually has happened to me. It's happened to Pastor Mike. I think every pastor has gone through that situation. I'm not saying it's wrong for people to ask questions, but I think there's a timing.
And that's what I was going to get to. So
flabbergasted.
Well, no, I had an idea of how I was going to transition it, but my brain said no, but my heart said yes. So then I just came out as bleh.
Yes, of course.
But it's very easy for us to argue back. It's very easy for us to get offensive or to get to be offended and then to become defensive. It's so easy for us to just be like, well, oh, I'm sorry and whatever. And we're not actually helping them in that way. We're actually just enabling them in their negative thinking to just tell them that it's okay.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if somebody challenged, like, people would come back and they would tell me that it's too loud. I would pull out a decibel meter and then I would say, well, actually, it's louder. Like, it's louder to drive around in your car with your window rolls, with your window rolled down than it is for our sound system.
Yeah.
And so then I would show them that. And sometimes they would be like, oh, I like, sometimes, very few, they would be like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, and then I would often offer them a solution. I would say, like, well, because, I knew where the speakers were and all that. So it's like, we can, if I just said, oh, I'm sorry, we're just enabling them to keep thinking that it's okay, like what's going on. We're just enabling them. But if I can give them a solution, if I can come to a resolution by saying, like, well, look, I'm sorry if it's still loud. We have like disposable earplugs. Here you go. Or like, maybe try sitting in this row on this section because it's out of the way of the speakers. Or like, maybe just sit in the foyer for some of the service because we have nicer, quieter speakers in there. Or like, if you give them a resolution, then it takes all the responsibility off of you and it puts them on them.
Yeah. We definitely, and I think that's one thing when it comes to even Christians. Sometimes I feel like we have to like always agree with that person.
Yes.
We can't have any conflict. We can't have any disagreements. And so what we do, and I think pastors are guilty. I'm guilty as a pastor sometimes. Or we're like, oh, I'm so sorry, like what you're saying. And I'm like, but I actually don't mean it.
Yeah.
I actually really don't mean it. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. But just to avoid the conflict, but then what happens is that it becomes a bigger issue later on. Yep. And then it not only becomes a bigger issue for me, but it becomes a bigger issue for our church.
For everybody.
Because you set a culture. You actually are setting a culture, and you allow something that could be changed or you'd be like, actually, no, this is how we're doing it. And that comes sometimes from like maturity as a leader. Yeah. I'm just starting to learn how to do this. I'd be confident in like, no, I made this decision and I believe that it's the right decision.
And that's what
how do you get it across to them?
Yes.
In a way that it's like, cause like rather than like being like a turtle and they're just hiding in my shell and letting them like, okay, continue to do what they want to do, take assertiveness and be like, no, actually I'm a leader here. God has trusted me to do this and I'm making a call.
Resolution doesn't always have to be compromise.
No.
Okay. And so you said that, and I really wanted to emphasize that. Resolution doesn't always have to be compromise. Sometimes resolution can be telling somebody that they're wrong. As long as you do it in a loving way and can help them understand and grow from it.
Yeah. Explain why they're wrong too.
Yeah.
Don't just say you're wrong.
And help them learn from it. Right? It goes back to the forgiveness thing. We're so good at knocking them down, but we're not good at actually helping them get up and get over it. Right? So we here at Bethel, I'll just be honest, we weren't live streaming worship for the longest time. Right? We just weren't. Right when I first started, we were only doing the sermon. And that's fine. But I knew that I had people asking me like, Logan, how come we're not doing this? How come we're not doing that? And I came to the conclusion that like we are going to live stream the worship. And it took a buy-in from all of our volunteers and everything like that. And I had people complaining about it. Like they were like, oh, but now it's longer and blah, 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 blah. I was like, well, you can just turn the stream on at the exact same time you would before and just catch the sermon. Yeah. I was like, nothing changes for you. And that's what I mean. So instead of me getting mad and trying to compromise and saying, well, oh no, maybe you just, do this or I'll change it. It was, no, like, here's a solution without it being a compromise.
Yeah.
And I said, no, God has told us that we are doing this. And so, and this doesn't go for just pastors. No. Everything we're saying here we're using examples as pastors because that's who we are and what we do. But if you're a board member at your church, if you're a volunteer, even if you're just a member, even if you're not a Christian and you're listening to this, all of these things still.
If you're at work, it doesn't even have to be in the church. Like if just it's just everyday life, like conflict is everywhere. It's not. I mean, it's in the church as well. Yeah.
When I was working a secular job, my friends, and they were my friends, but sometimes there are other coworkers and stuff like that who would like legitimately just like argue back with me about like everything, especially when I became a supervisor. Like, because they were older than me and I was younger and I hadn't worked there as long, but I was promoted to supervisor ahead of them and stuff like that. And like they would try to trap me. They would try to do all of these things. And I would fight back, right? But I was younger and dumber and more naive and ignorant. But I would fight back and I'd be like, hey, look. And I'm telling you this is a bad example. I had a little name tag and I said, this says supervisor. This means you listen to me. Terrible way to handle those situations. Like absolutely the worst way to handle it. It is an abuse of power. And
if you have to say you're the leader, you're not really the leader.
Exactly. and then I learned that lesson, but like these things, this idea of arguing is like, it is okay to do it if we approach it in love. And we approach it with the ability of actually wanting to solve the problem, whether that be through a compromise. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We had some technical difficulties. It was my fault. I'll just be straight up honest. I think I bumped the power cord. It happens. We all make mistakes. So we're just going to try to get right back into what we were talking about, which I was getting ready to transition into something that Timothy says in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 23 to 24, where he says, have nothing to do with foolish, ignorant conversations or controversies. Because all we know is they breed quarrels. And let the Lord's servants not be quarrelsome, but be kind to everyone, have the ability to teach and patiently endure evil. So Timothy is basically saying that when you go to approach an argument and you think you're right, you still have to be kind about it. You still have to approach them with the ability to be able to teach them, like why you think you're right. Why do you you still have to be able to be kind and love them, because that's still what we are called to do.
Yeah, go forth in that place of love, not just I'm right, you're wrong.
Exactly.
And I'm right, and then we're gonna stay that way.
Exactly.
Right. The next passage that I actually have on here is that, so then let us pursue what makes for peace and for mutual upbuilding. That's found in Romans 14, verse 19. And I want to use that actually as an example, because like the way that I go into arguments now, I've started to figure out is like, I'm not always right. I might go into that argument being like, I'm 100% right. And you know what? I might be 90% right when I leave.
Yeah, I get
But
you.
then in the process of that, if I'm not willing to actually hear out the other person, I'm not actually doing an effective job of teaching. Because I think even being a teacher, you also need to be able to be taught.
For sure, absolutely.
And like mutual conversation. So if I'm having a conversation, actually, this has happened many times here at just on staff. Me and you have had conversations and we've had disagreements. Like
Absolutely.
We've been like, I don't agree 100% with you, but then I leave that conversation thinking about what you said. And I was like, oh, okay, like actually he had a really good point here. And I think like if we don't do that well, if we're not good teachers and we're not learning, we're actually just staying in one place. And I actually wanted to highlight one passage here.
Go for it.
And it is in Acts 15. Acts 15 is like this like pinnacle moment besides like Acts 5. There's like a few moments in Acts that are like really huge. And this is one where I think like conflict resolution, like there's a man named Paul. Everybody might know who Paul is.
We all know Paul.
Oh, Paul. And then there's a man named Peter. And so two really well-known names in the church, both very strong leaders and both had callings from the Lord. Now, Paul felt the calling from the Lord when he came to know Jesus, to go and preach to the Gentiles. Where Peter, we see it right from the Gospels, it was told to build the church. And so they both have these strong callings from Christ himself, but they were opposing opinions. They were in disagreements of how that was to go about. Peter wasn't sure if we were actually supposed to go and preach to the Gentiles. And he's like, whoa, what are you doing, Paul? Like, we need to preach to the Jews. Jesus called us to preach to the Jews. We're going there. But then Paul's like, we need to talk to the Gentiles. We need to preach to them. God fulfilled this so that we preach to everyone. And so what ends up happening, they have such opposing opinions.
Yep.
And they're arguing back and forth that they actually get people to come in. They have this huge meeting of like leaders amongst the churches.
Yep.
And they come together and they're like, we need to come to an agreement of what this is going to look like. And they come to there, they have a disagreement and they come to a resolution. And that resolution is that, Paul, you can go and preach to the Gentiles. I think with what you've brought forth, your information is true. And actually what we're bringing is also true. But just because we have different callings doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. And so they'd say, go forth and make sure that they are eating of purity and like staying pure in the ways that they do. And and then going forth. And then in the end, they came to a resolution after arguing, but it came through multiple people. It came through opposing opinions. And I think both people learned from it.
Absolutely, yes.
I imagine like Peter was ticked. I imagine Paul was ticked. And that's why they had to bring more people into it.
Yes.
Because it's like neither of them was 100% right. But they were also both right.
And, yeah.
They both had the reasons in that, but it had to be discussed to kind of like pick out the nitty gritty. And it was like, I imagine there's things that Paul brought forward that might have been picked apart and be like, oh, maybe that's not true. We don't need to do that. And same with Peter. Where it's like, hey, that's actually not maybe what Jesus was saying. And so they pick it apart and they allow with this now movement of where to go, the direction.
Yes. Through
an argument. They came to a resolution. I love that passage. I think in the church we need to look at that regularly, and of how to actually deal with proper conflict and arguing, because it does resolve itself. Well, it doesn't resolve itself in us.
But I know what you mean.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, what I was talking about earlier too, when I mean that you're right and you need to Bryce is right. It's not that you don't argue all the time to try to be right. Right? Because sometimes we are wrong. Yeah. Okay? It's to be right, you also have to be willing to be wrong.
Yeah.
So
that's a good way. That's a really good way of putting it.
Yeah. So just to clarify what I was talking about earlier in the podcast and stuff like that is to be right, you also have to be willing to be proved wrong. And that's what makes a good, healthy, constructive argument is that ability.
Yeah.
You have to be also willing to prove wrong because just like you, the amount of times I've been proven wrong and learned something, even from yourself, like everything that you said about us having conversations is completely mutual, right? Like we do this podcast. Yeah, you guys learn something, but I also learned stuff through it. Pastor Mike and I, oftentimes before we even, before I get to work preparing an episode, I'll sit down in his office for like sometimes like 2 hours and we'll go over different ideas for the podcast. And we both learn from each other because as much as he and I are similar in everything, we're not. He's old. He's older. He's been in ministry longer than I've been alive. So it's like, I, of course, am going to learn from him, but that doesn't mean he also doesn't respect what I have to say enough that if we do get in an argument, I can actually kind of prove why I'm right, or he can prove why I'm wrong. Right. And that's how you get to resolution. You have to be willing to also be proved wrong. Because if you don't, then you're also just being a jerk. So I said, so you're
being naive. You're being
naive.
naive if you believe that you're always right.
Absolutely.
You're being prideful.
So I guess what I want to kind of wrap up here. How do you know when an argument has gone too far?
I think, you also, once again, great source that you sent here. It was like the 5 things or 6?
Yeah.
6 things. Do you have that? Do you have that on? I might still have it on my phone here.
I can open it up here. I also try to find good resources for you guys during the podcast. So there's going to be a link in the description of all of these podcasts. I found this really cool argument sort of thing for like marriages, but it can be applied to everywhere. And it's literally 5 things to recognize once your argument has gone too far. And the first one is if it never leads to a resolution.
Boom! It's like we've been talking about that this whole
time. It's almost like I use this as a source.
Step 2.
Well, it ends. An argument has gone too far is if one person is stonewalling. Like I said, you're not willing to reach a compromise, to reach a resolution. Yeah. Or if your arguments regularly include like name calling,
you're a jerk.
You've reached that jerk status that I talked about, where you're just
an excessive cursing, and it's just not. It's not being productive at that point. It is not.
You're being mean.
Yeah.
Or truthfully, and this one is more for I think specifically for marriages, but I still think it
applies.
It does apply to all types of relationships. If your argument leaves you feeling disconnected or distant from your partner, even necessarily if you guys come to a resolution, but it leaves you feeling pulled apart, then you didn't come to a good, healthy resolution.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you were naive or too prideful to accept the resolution too. So you have to recognize that in yourself. I mean, arguments are what you remember as the focus of your relationship.
Yeah, if I leave that and I think like me and Logan had an argument and I leave, man, this guy's a jerk. Like, and that is now how I think of him, because he did all those things. He was calling me names. He didn't want to listen. He was dismissive. He was like, I'm right, you're wrong the whole time. I'm going to leave. And I'm like, I never want to have a conversation with this guy again.
Yeah.
I was like, because this guy's a jerk. Like, he's not going to listen. He's not going to be willing to even consider what I'm saying. I'm going to leave, and I'm gonna be like, I'm not going to. I'm going to probably tell other people about it. I'm like, hey, I'm going to start. I'm not even going to say. I was going to say I'm going to start gossiping about him. But
I know.
I'm going to say it. It was like, hey, no.
It's funny, when I was, in like junior high, I had a friend whose name was also Logan, and we were good friends. Like, he was new to our school, so I tried to become friends with him and stuff. Our families became pretty close. We argued about everything because he and I were just the same.
Yeah.
And eventually our whole friendship was based around arguing. Anytime we looked at each other, we just thought about arguing. And so it's like eventually we just grew apart and we don't really hang out. We don't I haven't talked to him in years. But it's like I look back on that and I think wow, I kind of lost a good friend out of that just because we were both just willing to like argue and everything like that. And it's really sad. So those are, I guess, 8 things to recognize when your argument has gone?
5 things.
5 things.
Yeah.
Now, I guess another real question, and we talked about this off air, but I want to bring it up.
Okay.
How do you approach someone you intend to argue with?
How do you approach someone you intend to argue with?
How do you bring up beef with somebody?
That was a tough question, even off air.
Absolutely, because like I mean, we prepare for these things.
Yeah.
Dropping the veil. We talk about these things. We prepare them a little bit. So I have some answers to these questions, but I want to hear from you because and I'll remind you of what you said, but if you don't remember, like I'll remind you because you had a really good answer.
Yeah, hopefully I can reiterate it. Sometimes it just comes in the moment. The question was, how do you approach conflict? When I know I have something with someone.
Yes. How do you approach an argument with somebody?
I think
when is the appropriate time?
Timing is very key. Is actually like giving them a heads up. Don't just like blindside them out of nowhere. I don't think maybe there's something. Jesus responded very well from blindsided questions.
Yes.
And but I think a lot of us don't respond very well from being blindsided. And so if you have a question with someone, and if you know you have you disagree and you're going to approach them, maybe send them a message first and be like, hey, I would love to go for coffee and talk to you about this, because then they can actually mentally prepare and they might have better responses. Where if you blindside them, immediately a lot of people will become defensive. And they'll immediately, because they don't expect it. They didn't know, and they're like, and so they start becoming defensive. And so I would say, make sure that when you are going to go and approach someone about a conflict or a discussion that might become heated, give them a heads up. Don't just be like, right after service, like someone gave a message, and then you go up to them and be like, hey, I really disagree with that point. I thought you were speaking heresy. And I was like, immediately I'm going to be like, It's like on the defensive, like, what do you mean? Like, and then I'm just, it's going to be tough. Like, I'd rather, like, I want to have that conversation, because if you think I'm speaking heresy, I want to hear it, because I think most pastors would be like, oh, okay, let me know, and I can correct myself.
Yes.
Or let's discuss it. But there's a timing. And I think that's the biggest thing for me. If you're going to approach it, go there. And then also make sure when you're going to approach someone, you're going with a cool head.
Absolutely. Yes, that is like...
Go with a cool head. If you're heated about that before and you're going in like, I'm like just right angry, you're going in wanting a fight.
And you're letting your emotions control you.
Versus like, take a breather, maybe take a day or two, let it sit, and then approach them with a level head.
So... Because I want to bring some levity to this. I have 2 older brothers, and I have one. My middle brother is like just 2 years older than me. And growing up, we fought a lot. And one time, like, he would play video games till all hours of the night, and it would keep me up. And I already had insomnia, so it was already just like this, like. And I remember talking to him about it so many times, being like, "Hey, like, I don't care if you're up all night. Can you just be quieter? Like just not even like, you know." And I was like, and then I waited and waited. And then one time I like totally lost it on him. I let my emotions drive me, and I was upstairs laying on my couch. I was reading my Bible actually. And he came upstairs, and he was just ready to pick a fight. And it wasn't the appropriate time for either of us. But it especially wasn't the appropriate time for me to respond, because I was tired and I was mad at him. But I decided to respond in violence, and I sucker punched him. And I am admitting this on video, so he can always have record of it. Taylor, I sucker punched you, and I have said sorry, and I am saying sorry again. He had a black eye. It was swollen. Like, I have never punched somebody like that since, or even before that. It is the one and only time. And then we kind of wrestled a little bit. And then I was like, I was still so mad, but I just left, because I was like, nothing is going to get accomplished. That was not the right time to broach the subject.
Yeah. So
I went away and went for like a good 3-4 hour long walk, and I bought him candy.
I'm sorry.
I legitimately went and bought him a Slurpee and candy and came back and handed it to him and kind of was like, hey, man, I'm sorry. Let's talk about what happened. And then we did, and we made up for it, and it's all good. And so I tell that to say, like, it's okay if somebody approaches you to say, like, hey, you know what? I would love to talk about this later. Or if you're the one, like, also learn how to read people a little bit and read social situations.
Yeah.
Like, my brother could tell I was upset, but he still kept poking the bear.
Yeah.
So to speak. So I think that's also, like, really, really important. And don't do it at, like, 10 o'clock at night. like seriously, like learn some boundaries.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes, like, I remember when I was just even, like, an intern, somebody had a problem with something that I did. And they somehow found my, like, personal phone number, and they called me at, like, midnight just to complain. I don't know why I answered the phone, but I did. And yeah, they were complaining. And I was like, you could have just waited and sent me an email or like, so I think just learn to respect the person's boundaries as well. I think that's a good, healthy way to approach like conflict in an argument with somebody as well.
Yep. Did I answer it?
Absolutely.
Did I answer the way that I said the other day?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to
exactly.
make. I was like, I think it was, but I was trying to remember.
No, that's exactly what you said.
Perfect.
I just wanted to add the story about my brother to show that, like, look, on both sides you have to recognize.
Yeah, read the situation.
Yeah.
Also, hey, just a nice little tidbit here. Also, don't approach someone in conflict right after they woke up from a nap or just woke up from sleeping.
Yeah.
Probably not a great time. I've had that similar there with my roommate when I lived in Lethbridge. He wanted to talk to me about dishes when I was sleeping on the couch having a nap after a long day at work.
Ah, yes.
And I snapped. He learned his lesson not to do that after I woke up. I told him afterwards, like, don't do that when I'm just waking up. I think there's a lot of people that you don't poke a sleeping bear.
Now, just to...
I'm on my part too. Like,
no, absolutely. And now, if I will say, just as kind of to get everybody thinking, because there's no direct right answer to this. But if the problem is big enough, and the problem is like that much of a precedent, then yes, you can go and push. Like, if somebody has like actually like hurt you and stuff like that, or like, let's say Bryce is a serial not dishwasher. You're a serial soaker, as they call it. You leave all your pans on the stove to soak because you're too lazy to wash them. I mean, I do that. I literally have a pan soaking at home right now. So, just know that, like, it is okay if something is serious enough to bring it up. Because
that's a good point. Like, even like when you say that, like that, me and my wife, like me and Ashley, a couple days ago, actually, like, I mean, having a newborn, there's really not a great time anymore, to be honest, to bring up conflict or to bring up discussions. And that happened the other day where it's like, Ashley's like, I need to tell you right now because, well, I was like, there's not really a good time anymore. And she's like, I know if I keep on hanging on to this, it's going to lead into even more conflict. And so I just need to tell you. And that's where, like, I just had to, I heard her out. I said it was good for her to say. I said, right now, I need to just think it and process it. And then we dealt with it later on. But in that moment, she needed to get it out. Was it the best timing? Probably not. But we know each other well enough that we know is, hey, when I told her, hey, I need time, she respected that, and then we go. So it's like, you're right. Sometimes there is no good time to bring it up, but be aware.
Yes, and that's all. Just read your surroundings a little bit. Because, like, I'm not a parent. I don't have a kid, so it's a little different. But if I have a serious enough problem with Pastor Mike, I know that, like I should bring that problem to him as soon as possible.
It's your responsibility. Otherwise, you're just poisoning yourself.
Exactly. So I guess my other question is, because we've talked a lot about emotion. We talked a lot about how we shouldn't necessarily let our emotions drive us in an argument, because that leads to, it can leave us to become unhinged. So how do we separate then the facts and our feelings? And there's no right answer to this. I guess more my question is, how do you do it? Because I know how I do it. And I can go first if you want time to think, because it's...
No, I'm chuckling because this is something I'm really... Like, I'm a passionate person. If anybody listening or knows me, like, I get very passionate. And sometimes my passion comes across as aggression. And that's actually something I've had to learn to work on myself, because my emotions can actually, like, a passion is an emotion. And
Absolutely.
that part is a good thing for me, but it can also be a bad thing. And so I've had to actually learn to assess afterwards where I was at.
Yeah.
Because sometimes actually I think I dealt with it, but I didn't. And so, yeah, they're literally like to separate the emotions and facts can be very difficult. For me, I do it afterwards. And then if I realize I was not as factual, but I was more emotional, I have to own up to that. And then I go and talk to the person.
Yes.
And be like, hey, I was not, I did a poor job of this. So that's how I would say I separate.
We got to wrap up. So this is gonna be our closing comment.
Ask a question and then like, we got to wrap up.
But you have a time commitment, and I don't want to keep you. And I just saw the time, so we'll probably
Oh yeah,
you got to go. So the best way that I have found to keep your facts and feelings separate, because you shouldn't completely remove your emotions from an argument.
No.
You just can't let it be at the forefront.
Yes.
So what I have learned is you have to just listen first.
Yeah.
Even if you're the one starting the argument, you have to be a better listener than a better speaker, because you already know what you're trying to argue.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to listen, because that's how you learn what the other person is actually saying, and then that's what lets you drive more facts or more things that actually help promote your argument than just screaming obscenities at them because you're upset.
Yep.
So that's one way that I have found, is you have to be a really good listener. And you also have to just be really good at
decompressing.
Well,
is that what you're trying to say?
No, decompartmentalizing.
The other big word.
The other big word. You also just have to be willing to, like Timothy says, you do have to be willing to be patiently endure some evil, because not everybody's going to get their emotions in check.
I think one last thing that came to mind. Pastor Mike actually was he's taught me this from probably my first year being a pastor here, because he's been my senior pastor. Yeah. And it was learn to control your emotions and not have them control you. And so each time you go into a conflict or an argument, you might have emotion, but each time you learn. So one time you might blow up emotionally and you're like, okay, you assess it. Like I said, afterwards, okay, how did you slowly learn to control your emotions and not have your emotions control them. People have said to me, it's like, my emotions is some of the best part. I actually am a better leader when I'm emotional.
Absolutely.
My emotions are one of the better parts. Other people, emotions of them aren't a good part of them.
Exactly.
They don't function better with emotions. Where for me, it's like, I function best when I show emotion. And so what I've had to learn is how to control my emotions and not let them control me, which is easier said than done. Because in arguments, you get like anxiety, you get all these feelings, like you're angry, you're frustrated, you're all these things, but then you have to be able to compartmentalize it.
Yeah.
That big word.
You just got to be willing to separate.
That's a way better. Again, put it into the boxes where it needs to be and deal with the situation at hand.
Yes. So we covered a lot in this episode. We had some technical difficulties, so if it kind of seems there's two separate things going on, we apologize. But all the content is still relevant and good to how do we argue well? How do you have conflict with somebody and do it in a healthy way? So thank you so much for listening to this episode of Forgiven, to watching it. YouTube has actually been going surprisingly well.
That's awesome.
Actually, it's way more work on me to get them up and everything like that, but I do it for you. So please, if you're watching on YouTube, leave a like, hit the share button. That's the best thing you can do. Whether you're listening on any audio platform, whatever, share it, because I genuinely don't care how many followers or whatever we have. I just care that more people listen to it. So yeah, hit the share button. That's the best way you can support the show. Leave us a review on Apple and Spotify. I do check them. So if you give me a 1 star, I'm going to read it and I'm going to want to know why you gave us 1 star, because we want to improve. So thank you, Bryce, for coming on and talking about this kind of stuff. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for listening to Forgiven, everybody. And we'll catch you guys in the next episode.
Peace.